is Julie Went. I am a licensed nutritionist at Potomac Psychiatry, and I am excited to present to you today on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is nourishing our children with autism spectrum disorder. It's part of what I want to go through today is a basic understanding of what I do as a integrative nutritionist, because that kind of lays the framework for how I'm going to talk about opportunities to nourish your children and create an optimized cellular environment for them to work at from a foundation of. As we get started, I wanted to talk about the integrative nutrition principles that I use to guide my work. And it's a principle series that starts with a healthy cell. It is sometimes referred to as a systems biology approach. And the reason why it's important is because it is informing how I go about talking about nutrition, diet, and how we're feeding our children. So at our very foundation, what we want to do is deliver the nutrients that our cells need in order to function as they were designed. So every cell in our body, regardless of the function that it has, whether it's in the heart or the brain or the kidney, is designed with the same basic cellular biochemistry. And the goal of our nutrition that we get through our food is to ultimately deliver the cofactors or the fuel that our cells need to run that biochemistry. So when we think about food choices in that context, we start to choose things in a way that may be different if we were thinking about food choices from the perspective of a food pyramid or what my kids like to eat, right? Those are all going to be like different lists. But for me, it's all about how are your cells doing? Are they getting those cofactors that they need? Now, there are some things that can get in the way, even if we're eating all of the nutrients that we need through our food and we're getting a good variety of nutrients through our diet. We also need to digest and absorb all of those nutrients. And then based on our health history, our genomics, there may be hiccups in even how we take those nutrients and use them in our enzymes and convert them into the compounds that we need. So I kind of think about this on several different stages and thinking about getting that cell healthy and allowing it to find that homeostasis, which is this balance that we're really programmed to find. We have to think about it in that whole context. So that's where I like to start. And when I think about delivering those nutrients, we start with hopefully choosing the best foods that we can. The second piece of this puzzle is going to be the digestion and assimilation into our body through our GI tract. So we want to be aware of and correct anything that we see that's getting in the way of our digestion working properly. So it can be everything from whether or not we're chewing our food properly, how our digestive enzymes are functioning, our microbiome health. All of that is involved in ultimately getting the food into a state where our cells can take advantage of those nutrients and cofactors. So the second tier that we look at is a healthy gut. And when we think about our gut, it really is this primary interface between the inside of our body and the outside world. So that interchange is really important, and we pay attention to that to make sure it's working properly. A big piece of what happens in our gut that you may have already learned about through Dr. Knight is about our beneficial bugs that inhabit our GI tract, mostly in our colon, and do all sorts of wonderful things for us, from producing anti-inflammatory fatty acids, to producing vitamins and minerals, to producing neurotransmitters. So the gut is really ground zero for the health of our body. And there's a lot that we can do through our diet and our nutrition to help feed those beneficial bacteria and make sure that they are happy, well-fed, and functioning as we need them to in order to feel our best. So likewise, the concept of this gut-brain connection is very much at the forefront of the work that we do when we're working with individuals that have any kind of concerns around cognition and mood. So knowing this very intricate connection between what's going on in our gut through this superhighway called the vagus nerve, and how our gut and our brain really work together to set the stage for basically how our body operates. Okay, so paying attention to your gut health, an important key to creating that overall cellular nutrition that allows us to create that balance and homeostasis that our body really strives for. So when we have those things, what we find is that we get to a higher level of function throughout our whole body. So the reason it's called a systems biology approach is because oftentimes when we're looking to correct concerns or patterns, and we start at these foundational pieces, cellular health, gut health, we find that the whole system is working better, and various body organs and areas of the body that we're thinking about improve. Okay, and all of this in the larger context is part of a 5-pillar approach to health and well-being. So diet is one piece. Love to talk about food. It's so important. Very big impact on how our body works. Equally important is our other lifestyle pieces that we're not going to get into, but I do want to raise them because we all have strengths and weaknesses. There may be some parts of this that go better for you and your children than others. And just know that all of this together kind of helps us reach our optimal health capacity. So we're thinking about sleep, our emotions, our stress, our ability to move and be active, and social connection. So those are all pieces that really help our body achieve our healthiest self. Okay, so drilling down into the basics of nutrition and sort of what I want to make sure everyone is on the same page with is the way we talk about nutrients from our food. So we have these big nutrients, we call them macronutrients. This is the protein, the fat, and the carbohydrate. So those are the main aspects that maybe more people are familiar with. Trying to get a nice balance between these in our diet is really the name of the game. And different foods are high in some things like protein. A higher protein food might be an egg or a legume, and other foods will be higher in carbohydrates. And we think about something like a potato or a grain would be higher in carbohydrates. The fat predominant foods are going to be something like nuts and seeds and olives. We all know that foods are complex, and often these foods will have components of each of these macronutrients, but fine-tuning and making sure we're getting access to all of these macronutrients helps us do things like balance our blood sugar, preserve our energy, make sure that we're getting the feeling of fullness. And at the same time, it's also when we have a good balance of those macronutrients, it helps us make sure we're getting the micronutrients that we need. Okay, so Micronutrients are our vitamins and our minerals. They act as very important cofactors in that biochemistry that we talked about in terms of our cellular machinery working. So this is a lot of what the actual fuel of our cells is coming from in terms of delivering from the proteins and the fats and the carbs, these small cofactors that help that run smoothly. And there's an association between the two. So if we end up getting too many carbohydrates, we end up not having a good array of these micronutrients. So variety is an important piece of getting what we need through our diet. And then we have these non-nutritive compounds, which are things like the antioxidants and the colors. So we call them those phytonutrients. They play a critical role in how our body works as well. Fiber, we're going to feed our beneficial bacteria with these, and that's going to allow them to create all of those aspects that we talked about before in terms of the vitamins and the fatty acids and all of that. So, and the third thing to think about is water, and making sure water is an important piece of how our body functions as well. So, and these are all things that can be tricky to get in. And what I hope to do is help you think about overall dietary intake in the context of your child and see where you might start working to balance things out a little bit. Because again, the goal of this is to make sure that your food is working to fuel your cells so that your cells can work well, and the tissues and the organs that those cells are made out of can also work well. So when we think about the evidence base for using diets therapeutically in kids with autism spectrum disorder, there's been a lot of controversy in this space. There's very different perspectives. And what I wanted to do for you today is offer you my assessment based on the latest review of the literature in terms of what do we know about using these different dietary approaches and the outcomes that we might expect. Because anytime that we're invoking a therapeutic diet, we're adding a layer of complexity to feeding our children and the socialization piece of maybe what they're allowed to have and what they're not allowed to have. So, you know, everyone needs to make that assessment and make sure that it's a good fit for your family. If you do decide to try one, I would definitely recommend connecting with a provider that can help you walk through that, if any of this sounds interesting. So the first and probably the most popular diet that we hear about is the gluten-free, casein-free diet. So latest review of this shows some promise. The studies are small. There's not a lot of volume, I would say, large numbers of children that have gone through this. But the ones that have, we see that there's significant behavioral improvements and even cognitive improvements in children that have taken this diet on. So gluten-free, casein-free will help some kids, and possibly, you know, if it fits into your family diet approach, then there may be something that you see positive happen from that. The second diet that we hear talked about a lot is the ketogenic diet. This has a lot less in terms of actual human studies. Mouse model evidence is very positive, and the impact that they're seeing in the mouse model is in GI tract improvement, which we know is a very common concern in children with autism. So it's something that is very restrictive, a little bit difficult to implement. And really the jury is still out into seeing actual implementation in children. So the third diet that's most commonly spoken about is a specific carbohydrate diet. Again, not great research. There's one case study, and a case study is just one person describing how it helped them. It's not large in any way. It's not controlled in any way. So there are some concerns with this diet, as well as the ketogenic, about taking out a lot of foods and whether or not that gives you access to as many nutrients as you need. But again, this is targeting a gut healing mechanism. And for some people, just anecdotally, they find that this has been helpful. Now, the next two approaches are more in line with the general theme of, say, the nutrient repletion model. So a lot of times what we see an association with in children with autism is nutrient deficiencies. In part, that is related to the typically restricted diets and the eating patterns that they tend to have. And so various studies are looking at what the nutrient depletions tend to be, and then working to fulfill those through either dietary changes or supplements and noticing improvements. Now, this model is not very surprising. It's very much how integrative nutrition works in terms of focusing in on that cellular nutrition. And when we think about what happens when our cells are functioning in a homeostasis, we see the primary concerns being addressed in terms of inflammation, oxidative stress. Those things work better when the cell has those cofactors. So, and we can really see that there are common patterns that these pathways are predictive for children with autism in 97% of the time, which is pretty strong predictive pattern in comparison to a neurotypical patient. So thinking about cellular nutrition, the nice part about this dietary approach is that it's less about restriction and more about what are you adding. And I really like to come from that place, definitely as a way to start. So the last model that I wanted to speak to just briefly, because you're going to hear a whole presentation on this from Dr. Knight, is this microbe gut brain signaling model. So this connection between what's happening in the gut and targeting your diet and your therapeutic attention towards a healthy microbiome and a well-functioning gut to help improve behavior patterns and cognition. So when you think about probiotics, tons of studies showing improvements. This is an intervention that is a little bit of a Band-Aid because we don't know enough about probiotics or the microbiome to really be able to pinpoint and say that this is why this one strain of probiotics works or why it should work, or to look at someone's microbiome and say, you know, here's how we need to correct the microbiome. That we just don't have enough information about that. But what we do see is that when we give kids probiotics and they take them for, I think the studies range from 4 weeks to 3 months, that there are improvements in behavior patterns. And so there's not a lot of downside to that. It's a pretty safe intervention. And it kind of speaks to this connection between the microbial health and brain patterns. So a lot of the studies that we see are all pointing towards an intervention being effective because it's working on the gut. So when we think about our diet, targeting things like our fiber intake, our polyphenol intake, that's going to come from our fruits and vegetables, and the omega-3 fatty acids in our diet. So that, using that as the guidepost for the therapeutic approach for your diet, is well supported by research, and it's definitely a focus of integrative nutrition and how we think about supporting everyone's health. In particular, the themes that you're going to pull from the research for nutrition interventions in autism spectrum disorder are about feeding your gut microbiome. So doing things that are supportive of the gut and avoiding things that are harmful to the gut. Examples being eating whole grains, delivering fiber, which is a primary fuel. And things to avoid would be maybe having, there's a lot of exposure that we get through our water to the pesticides. And so filtering your water will be helping avoid an exposure that would be harmful to your microbiome. Second thing that we see as a nutrition intervention and focus is that optimal gut function and structure. So beyond the microbiome, we have more of the functional mechanism that the gut uses. So how is chewing? Do you have sufficient stomach acid? Do you have GI symptoms, right? At the very start of it, if we have GI symptoms, let's investigate and try to resolve those, because those symptoms are an indication that the gut function is not working smoothly. So that's a big piece of the nutrition intervention, trying to balance out our inflammation, both locally and systemically. And part of that comes from those cofactors, making sure you have those on board. Part of that comes from those beneficial bacteria doing their jobs. But a target to reduce inflammation is going to help situate the cells in a more balanced environment where they can work as they're designed. Oxidative stress, very, very common concern and finding in kids with autism spectrum disorder. So oxidative stress is a natural part of how our body works. What our goal is through our diet and our lifestyle is to help balance the natural oxidative stress with antioxidant function. And antioxidant function can come through various ways. One of them is part of what we take in from our diet in terms of antioxidants, colorful fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices, those types of things. And then there are other things we can do. Exercise is a really great way to help improve our natural antioxidant response system. Mitochondria. So we need to talk about mitochondria as this critical piece of how your cell functions. And it's the site of where we're producing the energy units that our body works on. The mitochondria are involved in any kind of cellular dysfunction. They're very sensitive, and they tend to show signs of that oxidative stress and inflammation very quickly. So protecting our mitochondria is always going to be a nutrition target for our work, so that those mitochondria can produce energy. They do other things regarding optimizing your DNA expression and hormones and all of this. So they're a very critical piece within each cell that we want to make sure is working well. We've already talked about replenishing those nutrients, make sure we have all of the cofactors that we need to run our cellular biochemistry, and really support from a holistic perspective the bio-individual needs. So a lot of what we talk about thus far has been research, right? And research is helpful. It's a guidepost. It's what we start with. And at the same time, research is not your child, right? So everything needs to be looked at and considered through the lens of the unique individual that you have in front of you. So we need to think about your health history, the genomic picture, the lifestyle, and where do we want to focus attention? What is the right fit for nutrition and nutrition interventions to be supportive and make sure that what we're doing is helpful? Because even if we have like really great research that says it should be helpful, it's still your unique child. And so we still need to pay attention and let their responses kind of guide our work together. All right. So I provide this as my closing slide because I have children and I've had a weekend where I really do kind of feel like this woman looks. So we talk about all of this, and when I go to classes from my school or elsewhere that's trying to help me help my child, sometimes I can walk away feeling like, sure, in an ideal world, that sounds great. We'll do all of these things, but here's my real world experience. And what I hope that you take away from my talk is that these are options to consider. This is something that's going to be helpful for some, maybe for others, it's not the right time. But ultimately, how I like to approach things and what feels good to me when I think about it is good, better, best, right? So we might not always be able to achieve the optimal best scenario, but what is there some little step that we can take is good, or maybe better than it could be, or better than what we were doing, right? So tiny habits, little changes, particularly when you've got your hands full, are a key to allowing nutrition interventions to be supportive and not another stressful thing that feels impossible and kind of makes you feel like maybe you're not great at parenting. So I always want to make sure that we're approaching this with that type of mindset so that we're not adding stress, but we're adding support. Trying to think about feeding our children. It's such a vulnerable place because it is sort of this basic feeling of how do I take care of my kid? And yet it can be wrought with all sorts of struggle and stress. And trying to come at this from a place of emotional neutrality, maybe doing a couple deep breaths, setting the space in a way that allows for the best possible outcomes, and trying not to bring our own stressors about what's going to happen at mealtime or whether or not they're going to eat what we want them to eat, can help, even if it's just help us prepare for whatever environment kind of surfaces during mealtime. So having a good support network and making sure that you're putting this in the context and doing the things for your family and your child that feels most supportive. So that's what I tell all of my families, and I have to tell myself as well. We're going to do what we can. We're going to make progress, and we're striving, right? We're striving for better health for ourselves and our children. Thank you so much.